right, let's go ahead and get started. The Community and Economic Development Committee meeting. Today is, what is the day? May 4th, 2023.
May the 4th be with you.
Oh, there you go. Just love that. We're not crazy all day. Let's go ahead and have roll call.
Ms. Broad?
Here.
Ms. Braga?
Here.
Mr. Constance? Mr. Cross?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah.
Here. You know.
Mr. Martinez? Mr. Myers?
Here.
Mr. Perez-Vardilla? Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Silva?
Here.
Mr. Warren?
I think there's a presentation.
And
We all know
Mr.
that.
Cox.
Yep. Well, good morning, everybody. Appreciate you being here today. I do want to amend our agenda. We've got a light schedule today. We should be able to go through this pretty quick since we just had a conversation regarding some of our new business last week, and we're continuing. I do want to add to new business, we'll call that C, which would be the $100,000 for pre-approved plans, and just discuss that briefly, that we added to the budget at the last assembly meeting. So any other introductions? We have unfinished business. Any unfinished business? We don't have anything under there. Is there any topics that you would like to discuss under unfinished business?
No, I think since we brought up here last time on the short-term rental legislation, so Meg and I continue to work on that, and where we're at, we greatly pared it back to essentially probably a permitting process. A lot of just to gather data, to in a way, we have a lot of the enforcement in place already, but with the permit, it'll maybe give us a little bit larger stick for those that violate noise ordinances and stuff like that. So,
Would be a cap on the number of permits that, you guys kind of figured that one out yet, right? No?
no cap. So we're not putting any kind of restrictions in there right now. We kind of have all that in the background. We did talk about Girdwood doing an overlay district, but I basically told GBOS if you want that, then you need to create it because it's kind of too hairy and I don't feel I understand their needs well enough.
I mean, I would say that the permitting process would be my preferred way of dealing with it rather than an overlay. I think that's probably the better way of dealing with it.
Yeah, we can do that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Anything else regarding short-term rentals?
Could I just ask Mr. Whitfield, when you say permit process, the administrative permit and only issue for?
Correct, yeah.
Excellent. I know that in Eagle River, the biggest issue we have with short-term rentals, typically as it happens back in Highland and Eagle River Valley, is most of the people who come up from out of state are not aware of how to properly handle trash. And so they're not used to making sure that they're, they don't leave food outside, they don't just throw bags of trash out front. And then there's a couple of nuisance properties we have that are short-term rentals that attract a lot of bears to the neighborhood. So, but that wouldn't cover legislation. That's just better education for individuals visiting Alaska.
Yeah, so we can add that because part of that, there'll be sort of an owner certification. They have fire alarm, smoke detectors, they have insurance, and part of that will be some documents they post in the STR, of which we could include bear awareness for trash.
Yeah, they're in rural areas, high hillside. All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on from unfinished business to new businthis. We had fantastic conversation regarding treating triplexes and fourplexes as residential. I found that meeting that we had was that this week or last
Friday?
Together.
Last Friday?
Last Friday. There you go. When you work 8 days a week, they all blend together. So, and that was extremely productive. And so since then, I also had an opportunity to meet with Craig Bennett at S4. I wanted him to put together a list, and his almost paralleled what we had already put together. So a lot of overlap of the same concepts of treating triplexes as fourplexes. Since that meeting last Friday, has there been any other developments, consideration, questions, or concerns that we need to address? Okay, because I think right now our next meeting, I believe, is May 17th. So we're going to continue on that. Forgive me, I may be off on that, but I believe it was right around the 17th is our next follow-up meeting.
May 12th.
May 12th? Okay, thank you.
I think we'll finish the Title 21 stuff at that meeting.
Okay, excellent. So make a note, May 12th is the next roundtable discussion. I found that to be very productive. We'll continue to go through that list as well as address any new things that pop up. It would be nice that we would have something to introduce by the May 23rd meeting. It's going to be a hard push, but if we can get something forward as we work towards an omnibus. I know that there's some other things that are kind of parallel that we're working on in other committees, but we'll get that before our other departments regarding treating triplexes and fourplexes more like residential. So next one we have is anything on that, anything else you want to add on that before we move on to adjusting minimum lot sizes?
Just, Mr. Chairman? Yeah,
Chris.
thank you. Chris Schutte, private consultant. So one of the other jurisdictions that we've been in frequent communication with about this concept is Shelby County, Tennessee, which covers Memphis area. And the building official there has made himself available for Zoom Q&A presentation type thing if the committee wanted to learn more about what they went through. Short version is they went from single family duplex up to 6 dwelling units considered, and they created a new zoning definition for that, calling it a large home.
Okay.
Anyway, he's available if the committee wants to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if you call it large home or if it's high density housing or some sort of, but it's not quite multifamily, so there's that ambiguous between residential duplex and say, you know, right now what we would say 5+ units, but if you were to extend that out to 7+ units, what do you refer to that category of properties as? Is that high density residential? I mean,
I think it's an interesting conversation that Shelby County went through, and you know, a common area of concern they had to address were fire code, the relationship of the building code and the fire code, and so I think he's got some good feedback on what they proposed, what they had to take back in order to meet codes, and et cetera. So happy to set that up sometime.
excellent.
Can I just ask, why wouldn't you call it multifamily?
Does anybody care to respond? Why wouldn't we call it multifamily?
Go ahead, Dave.
I think in this particular case, specifically with Title 21, the issue I think is whether or not the multifamily residential design standards apply, because there are specific design standards that kick in when you call something multifamily. And so I think we're trying to not place the triplex, fourplex developments in the residential design standards, multifamily residential design standards. So by calling it that, you would then, so that's sort of the reason.
Okay. I guess I would suggest, I mean, it's also possible to change the name multifamily, right? I mean, not to blow up this particular project, but a project I'm working in another city, the discussion is about renaming single family to detached housing, because there's a lot of baggage attached to those terms, right? And there's some stigmas associated with the idea that multifamily inherently creates more impacts on a neighborhood or has these other kind of things. So anyway, I just want to flag that's something to maybe consider, is that our terms are somewhat outdated.
I like that, Anna. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, and then maybe that's another way to get around how we characterize 1 unit, 3 or 4 units, 7 to 25 units, whatever it is.
Medium family, I mean,
Yeah, or just removing the word family, because there's certainly non-family house word.
Yeah, that's,
I guess that's what I mean, because historically we think of neighborhoods with one family living in a house as being
Right.
the default, and then everything else is considered to have more impacts, and I think that creates a lot of issues in
yeah.
how we look at land use. Sorry, not to throw that in there right away, but
It's referred to as housing.
yeah.
Excellent.
I just was, I know I'm late to the table, but I'm worried about parking. Already I'm getting lots of emails from people showing their cul-de-sacs blown up with cars all over because people are doing rentals in their personal houses. So is this, if you had a residential triplex, fourplex, treating it as a residential property, are you also making sure there's adequate parking for the increased people that would be in the structure?
Excellent. So your question is regarding parking?
Yeah, so recently the Assembly passed an ordinance that eliminated parking minimums, so there would be no requirement to provide parking. The amount of parking being provided would be solely up to the developer, property owner.
Another question.
Yes, sir.
So, as I understand, again, sorry, 'cause I'm late to the
Since
conversation.
we're on audio, when you have a chance to speak, if you would just say your name since there's not a video recording?
Sure.
Thank you.
Zach Johnson. So again, apologize because this has probably been addressed. As I understand it, we're changing, essentially redefining triplex, fourplex to residential, not commercial. Would this also permit triplexes and fourplexes to be built in areas or zoning categories where they're not currently permitted?
Dave Whitfield Planning, Mr. Johnson, not currently. No,
Okay.
not under this particular ordinance. That wouldn't be the case.
Thank you.
Randy?
So Randy Soul Assembly, so Zach touched on something I wanted to cover is what is this legislation about? And it's really about expanding the residential definition to triplex and fourplex and not the commercial definition. That's kind of the box we're working in, right?
So, and again, for those of you who are new and just getting caught up, what we're finding is in Anchorage, there's been an underutilization of land. That an R2M or maybe an R3 lot that you could build 4 or 6 units on, because of what happens when you go over duplex, because of the way it goes back to private development, the drainage studies, maybe off-site improvements, and the litany of other requirements that are additional requirements put on the contractor, they might just build a house or a duplex. But we need unit count. And so how do we extend and back off some of those restrictions? Because if they could build an 8-bedroom duplex, 2 4-bedroom units, then why should that be less restrictive than building a 6-plex with all 1-bedroom units? I mean, a 6-plex with 1-bedroom units might arguably have less people than a really large duplex. So perhaps by tying it to unit count, we've unintentionally, or by creating this designation of commercial and triplex, when lenders and banking industry sees everything up to 4-plex as residential, I mean, for loans and purposes. So how do we encourage unit count and redefine where that line going into commercial is? So this is what we're doing, and this will allow us to do what's kind of infill, which is these little lots that, you know, that aren't being developed, that are R2M or R3. This will allow some of the infill on some of these unutilized properties that are scattered around Anchorage, Spenard, Fairview, all over, but Midtown, not so much in South Anchorage, although there's a few, but anyway.
Thanks.
Yes, sir. Chris Constance.
I think that you should add to your talk and lead with the point that the lenders will lend residential up to fourplexes, because what that does is creates the argument that we're aligning our code with the actual monetary system that allows people to purchase and secure housing. And so that's a really strong argument that gets well beyond any of these zoning kind of fine details. It's like it will allow more people to be more able to participate in the process of either building or owning these fourplexes and threeplexes.
So lead with our whereas statements.
Add that in
with
there
our
for sure.
memorandum.
That's really valuable information. Like the lenders will lend residential up to a fourplex.
Yeah.
That's a strong argument.
And to give you guys an idea, the VA loan limit on your first purchase, there is no loan limit. Okay? So an individual with VA loan, as long as they can use the income from the property to qualify, so they can use the rental income to help qualify for the loan, means they could buy $1 million property with 0 down, up to 4 plexes. Okay? With no credit score requirement and minimum debt to income ratio. Now you may be like, that's really, really concerning, but the interest rates on VA loans are some of the lowest on the industry across all boards. It's not credit score driven. So they're gonna get in there, and even though their loan is 0 down, their debt service is oftentimes lower than somebody who's putting 20 to 30% down on the property. Because their interest is so low, it's amortized over 30 years, there's no mortgage insurance. So they're able to go in with less money to buy a larger property and immediately solve their housing need and the housing needs of 3 other individuals on a debt service term that is more than competitive, even a commercial rate, somebody not occupying the property. So by utilizing these financial mechanisms, we can use that in order to spur, because we have the highest veterans population of any state. I don't remember what the percentages are, but we have the highest per capita veterans and individuals who qualify for VA loans. And that's just one loan product. Chris makes an excellent point. Anything else on the triplexes and fourplexes before we move to adjusting minimum lot sizes and then on a plan database? All right, move on. Adjusting minimum lot sizes. This kind of came up during the triplex, fourplex discussion, but this, one of the things we want to have a conversation and what we're going to be looking at is right now, we have a minimum lot size in residential of 6,000 square feet across most zoning. And the question is, why is that? Why was it established at 6,000? Okay, that means that a subdivision much like New Napa Valley, which is very popular, which are little 720 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1-bath houses that are on 5,000. Some of those lots are as small as 5,000 square feet. Could never be done again. And it just means larger lots, and so do we adjust minimum lot sizes? Do we look at treating everything like a PUD? What are some of the things that we can do that allow for, as the tiny homes or smaller real estate? Because not everybody wants to live in a big 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage house. We need to have some options for people who live in smaller subdivisions without having to create HOAs and without having to do, a conditional use in order to streamline those processes. So, that's one of the things that we're looking at in our considerations. I'd love to hear from planning regarding, why we said 6,000 square feet, what problem we're trying to solve, and are there other ways that we can address that?
Yeah, Dave Whitfield, Planning. I think this is an interesting topic to discuss, and from my perspective, we have over time, and Mr. Schutte can speak to this as well, serving as past director of, I guess, our larger department. We have looked at alternative ways to solving some of these issues and encouraging more residential development. One that he worked on alongside me was the unit lot subdivision, and that's a subdivision where you could essentially create fee simple lots with no minimum lot size restriction. So it does require more planning up front. But it doesn't have necessarily the 6,000 square foot minimum attached to it. We've got conservation subdivisions. We've got cluster housing developments. We've got, as Kevin had mentioned earlier, we've got the PUDs and the conditional use permit process for that. So we have over time looked at alternative ways to encouraging more creative housing development. So I don't know necessarily that, reducing the minimum lot sizes for, some of our zoning districts is necessarily going to get us the housing that we're looking at or that we're looking to achieve. I think, looking at the residential design standards, doing the things that we're doing with triplex, fourplex is probably going to be a better way of achieving that. I just don't see I haven't seen in the past the minimum lot size as being the barrier to development.
Yeah, just as kind of a sidebar to this, we're in discussions about the housing summit, and I don't know if we have the tools to kind of pick some lots and run an analysis of the lots for the traditional barriers that would come up for development if a lot wanted to be put into development, so that we can start to see what those things are by pattern and by data, not just by kind of your experience.
I think for me, minimum lot sizes is not the problem. I think that if we're looking at increasing the number of housing units we have in Anchorage, we need to look at density and what the minimum lot size would be for a certain number of units. And I think that's where you're going to see the best bang for your buck, so to speak.
So kind of a two-part test.
Yeah.
It's like the minimum lot size and the number of units that can be on it. Those two sliders together.
Exactly, because in most of our residential zoning districts, or I should say all of them really, the number of units that you can build is based on the size of the lot. And so by adjusting the number of units, so maybe on an R2M lot, 6,000 square feet, you can build 3 units by code. If you up that to 4 units, and then by eliminating minimum parking standards and by adjusting your residential design standards spatially, you're able to actually build that on the lot. I think that's where you're going to see the best bang for your buck.
Anna, and then Randy.
Yeah, I guess 2 questions. Does this, because I think, we think about developing a new subdivision and platting it out and all those things. Would this adjusting minimum lot size also allow subdivision of existing lots? because we have a lot of basically
Yes.
large lot, neighborhoods where I don't know if the zoning would allow it right now, but
Well,
that's the other piece of that.
I think that's a good point, Anna. Dave Whitfield, again, planning. I think what you're gonna see is if you adjust minimum lot sizes, you're gonna also see a change in character to some subdivisions. And that may be something that we wanna see. But I think that if we do that, we need to recognize that will likely be the result. Where you have some of these, 8 or 10,000 square foot lot subdivisions that now have, developments of 4,000 square foot lots right next to them.
Randy and Zach?
So I guess just the Randy Sultan assembly, so just to clarify what Dave said, so if we cut lot size from 6,000 to 5,000, essentially you're only impact like a 10,000 foot lot that you can now subdivide into 2 lots. Is that kind of why you don't see reducing the minimum lot size to have that big of an impact?
Yeah,
It's already there.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think, like I said, I think the bigger issue, I haven't seen where minimum lot size has been a big issue for me, or for developers. I've seen the residential design standards being a major complaint. Obviously, parking has had an impact. I've heard, from Cook Inlet Housing Authority that spatially, when you talk about all these other characteristics, the landscaping and the parking, it's hard to get the number of units. It's not
Okay.
a minimum 6,000 square foot lots.
It's the things outside the lot.
Correct.
Offset
Yeah.
improvements,
Yeah.
the things that kick in.
Well, that's a whole nother thing. You talk about utility extension, improvements to right of way, things of that sort. Those are obviously barriers as well.
Chris, hold on, Zach, you had a question, Zach and then Chris.
Yeah, kind of follow to what I think Anna was asking. So would this increase the permissible density within existing zoning, or are you talking about just sort of the areas where you could say that they're not at capacity in terms of what's currently allowed?
Well, I mean, you could have, you might have a lot in a residential subdivision that's 10,000 square feet, and it's got one house on it. And then if you change the minimum lot size to 5,000 square feet, you could then subdivide and create another house. So in essence, yes, you're getting another unit. You are increasing the density of that neighborhood, which could then allow for further subdivision, which would, again, ultimately change the character of that. And if that's something that we, as a community, want, then great.
So just to follow up on that, if the chair will allow.
Please.
So when you're talking about, okay, you have a 10,000 lot with one house on it, and part of that I can't rattle off whether that's R1, R2, or what, but let's say that category of zoning allows for one residence per 10,000 square feet. And then this goes into effect, you can now subdivide that into 2 lots. I mean, is that happening under the existing zoning, or are we talking about a 10,000 square foot lot that already would permit, a density of 2 units within that 10,000 square feet?
Through the chair, Mr. Johnson, it could be either. It really is dependent on the zoning district. In our single family districts, you would only be allowed to have one single family detached residence there. So ultimately, you would be able to build a second single family detached on the newly subdivided lot. But if you were in, say, an R2M, a multifamily district, you could do more than that.
So, yeah, and so, it's complex because there's so many different scenarios you can run into. And what we're trying to do is create some reasonable malleability just because, it's hard to dictate for every situation that you would run into. Hey, Chris, do you wanted to add? You had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, thank
Please.
you. Chris Schutte, through the chair. To support what Dave just talked about, the minimum lot size historically has been something that philosophically seems like an easy adjustment to make it, an adjustment to make it easier to build housing. But like Dave said, we historically have not heard that that's the single biggest impediment. That being said, it doesn't mean that it's not without merit, because another point that Dave raised about the cost of utilities, simple math is the denser your acreage is, the lower your utility cost per unit, right? So if you're going from a minimum lot size of 6,000 down to 2,000, you're able to squeeze more units into a subdivision and spread that cost out among more residential units. We've done this in the past in Anchorage a long time ago. There's a great subdivision, happens to be one of my old subdivisions in East Anchorage, where they, under the old Title 21, were able to subdivide just over an acre of land into 22 3,000 square foot lots and build 1,200 square foot single family, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage houses on it. They look shotgun style. They're not pretty, but it's a pretty good use of land in a small area. This is off of Patterson, up in the Muldoon Curve, Ambler Circle. So it's an example of, in the past, where there was a variation in the minimum lot size allowed for a new subdivision that took a 1.08 acre piece of land and created 26 different single-family homes on it.
So,
On 1 acre?
I don't,
Hold on just a
One-
second.
one
And you're
point.
recognized.
Yeah, thanks.
1 acre.
I mean, on the point of cost, I guess what I heard Dave you saying is, there's options to do this. However, most of them come with a greatly increased process cost. I mean, conditional use adds to the cost. Having to do a special type of subdivision adds to the cost. So I just want to flag that I hear that there's alternatives, but it's still, there's still an additional cost that you're putting on it to basically have smaller homes. And I wanted to ask also, has there been discussion about lot coverage? Because I mean, that's the other variable, right? Is that, you can have more building on a lot plus a smaller lot, and then you're changing some of the characteristics that you're referring to in terms of how much you can build on the property.
right.
Okay, to answer Ann's question, then we'll go to Chris, because Chris is in the queue. We have discussed, at least in other conversations, lot coverage. If you, rather than have a minimum lot size, the difficulty is when they're doing a replat, they may not know what that house looks like they want to put on there. So how do they dictate that? If you're going to say that there is no minimum lot size, as long as the structure or the footprint of the property doesn't exceed 40 or 60% of the lot coverage, but not all developers know exactly what the footprint of that building is going to be when they're doing a replat. So then, it creates some difficulty in saying what can I realistically, unless you do the replat and just say you can't build a house bigger than X. And if you want to do add-ons and what does that lot coverage consist of, a carport, different things like that, because it all affects drainage. So, Mr. Constance?
Yeah, thanks. I just heard one of my trigger words, character of a neighborhood, or trigger phrases, and that's like almost universally used as a means of stopping any kind of housing projects. And so it's important to recognize the character of neighborhoods, and at the same time, it's important not to let that be the argument that
Agreed.
stops improvement from happening or change.
Agreed.
So I just wanted to get that out there.
And Chris brings up a great point. It's an interesting conversation we have because when we have these conversations with our community councils and individuals about projects and with real estate and workforce development in a neighborhood, that the individuals whose voices aren't being heard are the hundreds of people who could benefit from housing. And meanwhile, sometimes you just have a small handful of individuals that are very passionate about not seeing change in neighborhoods where they live. And I understand their concerns, and we have a significant housing issue. And so, I would love it if no one ever lived next door to me, but that's not the reality. I don't own that land. Right? So yeah, thank you. And then, no, we had covered that. That's correct. Any other questions regarding the minimum lot sizes? Obviously, this will be a discussion. We'll probably continue something along these lines during our housing summit. It may be that we don't do anything with it if it's just an exercise in understanding what our options are. And also maybe we just treat everything like a PUD and there's no conditional use. You have a lot, you want to carve it up. What does that look like? I think we're not only looking at trying to get some increased density and utilization of land, but also cutting back on the maybe the monotony in some of the processes that we have in there, and is there a way to streamline that process for developers? And so, we're just examining that. Nobody's made any definitive decisions right now, and I look forward to having a greater discussion regarding that. Anything else on that before we move on to the pre-approved plans? Fantastic. So this was item C. It's not on the agenda, but I did add it at the beginning. At the last Tuesday, we made an amendment to the budget, got $100,000 to invest in creating a pre-approved plan database for all forms of construction primarily residential through fourplex, maybe some smaller commercial ADUs. I know we have some pre-approved plans, but our intention here and the vision is to create an easy online database where people can go in and look through it. We've talked to the Anchorage home builders. They love that. There were several architects that said they're willing to donate plans. This does create some challenges, and we recognize that. Okay, now that we have plans, who's going to review them? And as code changes go by, obviously we need to go back and take a look at those pre-approved plans and make sure that they're always current, right? So there'd be a little bit of an examination of our pre-approved to make sure that individuals can pick from these plans and go straight to permitting. I'd like to know your thoughts on this as we put together this database and as we get this ready for the public. Questions, concerns, and things that we may, unintended consequences or things we need to take into consideration as we try to bring this to the public. Mr. Constance?
Thank you. I think the one thing that has to be really clearly defined is the process to go from a generic plan to a site-specific plan, right? There's a crosswalk that has to happen there, and I don't know if that's some form of design process that's additional, or because I don't think you can just go to permitting without taking a general plan and making it based on the specific land mass, whatever the earth is, the slope and pitch, all the things that go into a specific development. And so I want to make sure we have some mark on the table that addresses the crosswalk from general plan to site specific.
Excellent. Anybody from?
This is really a Title 23 issue. I would defer to Ross on it, and I'm not completely on the spot, Ross.
Thank you.
Ross, you're recognized.
From my perspective, I don't see a whole lot of value in this. And that's the perspective of someone who, I spend a lot of time in our electronic plan review software, pre-screening permit applications that are coming in. So I'm seeing a very large percentage of what's being built in Anchorage. And given our current dynamic of available land, cost of housing, what's being built, everything that's coming through is pretty custom and pretty unique. We're not building these big cookie cutter subdivisions that kind of lend themselves to, just one house plan 20 or 30 times. It's a really good point in the sense that a pre-approved plan is going to be designed basically probably assuming it's going on a flat lot, right? And so if you're going to build it on any sort of slope lot, you're going to put a daylight basement under it or tall crawl space, or you're going to have to customize the foundation design to address the sloping of the lot. I found that on the surface that sounds like a good idea, and I designed and built my own house, but I didn't intend to design it. I tried to find plans that would work for me, and you start looking at plans and you're like, oh, okay, this is going to work, but if I switch this around, it's going to be better. So now I'm changing it. So I could see, like, if the MOA did have a pre-approved plan thing, someone would pick a plan and then say, I want to build this plan, but I want to change it. And so DesignWorks is going to have to come along with that. They're going to have to hire a designer probably at that point then to amend the plan. They're going to have to hire a designer to amend the plan to accommodate the slope lot. I guess Indianapolis, Indiana did this or whatever. I don't know what sort of value it actually ended up having for the community, having these plans available to them. I haven't seen any sort of data, This seems like one of these good ideas that's not backed up by data. That's my input on it so far.
Mr. Constance?
Yeah, so I can't think of his name right now. Old home builder, works with broker. I used to do Hagmeyer. I sat in several design processes with him relating to building a home, and he had a book of designs that were really well done, right, ready to go. except that each one had to meet the client. The client had to say, well, I'd like this room to be a little bit different this way or that way. And they were able to achieve basically a pre-approved process for themselves, a model, if you will, that is then generalizable to a site with some changes. And so it seems to me there is a way to get there. I just don't know how that would work to go from, I know the builders can do it, maybe we can too. So,
Through the chair, so that, I mean, that's a great point in the sense that builders like Hagmeyer, Spinell, Hallquist, they have this extensive library of plans they've built, right? And they build them repeatedly. And back in the day when the MOA was doing all the structural plan and architectural plan review, and we were building, a lot more houses, we're building subdivisions, we were building a lot of pre-approved plans, meaning the MOA reviewed that design, approved that design, and then Spinell would submit that design maybe 50 more times. And we still have that pre-approved permit process in place with the reduced fees. It just doesn't get used anymore, primarily because two factors. One is we have this process now where the builder can hire their own plan reviewers, right? So they're not going through MOA review anyway. And two, they're just not building these repeated designs over and over again.
It's interesting, but the question then becomes, if I may respond to that, is that why aren't they doing those repeatable designs over and over again? Okay, and that goes back to our conversations that we've been having before. Is there not a market for them? No, there's a huge market for affordable housing out there. But then what is the cost, the time frame, and what are all the additional hurdles that we've put into doing these larger cookie cutter, you like to call them cookie cutter, or you might call them affordable housing neighborhoods? I can tell you there's several out in Eagle River that they've been languishing for years to develop and struggling with AWW and everything, which means once you look at the cost that goes into it and taking years to develop these acres of land, what ends up happening? They build huge $700,000 homes because they can reap back some of the profit that took them over years of developing. So it isn't that they wouldn't build them, Ross. I would argue that they would if we would simplify the process from the previous conversation and offer all these tools available. But we're not offering a litany of tools. We've made development very, very difficult. And therefore, the affordable people get wedged out. And that's the problem we're trying to solve with. And this is just one more tool, pre-approved plans, taking a look at our PUDs and how we do that process, taking a look at offsite improvements, treating triplexes like fourplexes. And so if you just look at pre-approved plans, that by itself, I would agree, would not solve the problem. But if we look at it like this is just a card and a huge deck of options we're providing the public to get affordable housing, you see that I think in the greater picture, it functions well. Anna?
Do the pre-approved plans, does that include things or potentially include things like accessory dwellings?
Yes.
Okay, because one question I have, so I don't own a lot where I can legally build an ADU. If I did, and I had a single family home and I had plenty of space and I wanted to build a small ADU, approximately how much would that cost me just in the design, like getting, not the construction, but the design right now? If I had to go do it myself and I had no pre-approved plan, is there how many $1,000s do we know? Or what order of magnitude?
Sonnet, you just designed one?
The design for my ADUs cost me about $2,500 just for the design.
Okay. Because I guess I would offer, there's developers who are building entire subdivisions, and then there's a person who does not have those upfront resources who is looking to add a unit to their property. So I think I just want to, if that's part of the discussion, I think there's different scales of
Excellent.
need.
Zach?
That was my question.
Oh, was that your question? Excellent. Do you have another question? Ross?
Through the chair, so if your ADU is going to be attached, that's going to require custom design. You might be able to find a floor plan that you like, but then it's going to have to be structurally integrated into your house, which is going to require custom design work.
I guess I'm still suggesting if we can reduce the marginal cost of doing that. I mean, there's still going to be other costs with it, but they're not happening now, even though they're not happening now to the rate that we would like. So there's still barriers in place that's preventing that from happening, and some of it is cost.
And through the chair, I mean, there's designers in Anchorage that have libraries of pre-approved plans. Like if you wanted to design something, most likely you would sit down with them and they would show you your catalog of options. That obviously saves them money because these things have already been drawn in CAD. They've already been structurally designed.
But what would they charge?
Would it be beneficial to have a database where they could upload those and it has who's the designer is, and if you want alterations or something, contact them and they just do a shared site. You have all the builders and all the architects that are willing to contribute to this mass database, and on that it says for adjustments, contact this individual. I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about. These are pre-approved plans. If you want to make alterations, here's the individual who developed the pre-approved plan. Contact them for design changes, and then help expedite and just create a massive library. Mr. Constance?
Yeah, that raises an interesting question. Are the plans as submitted public records?
Yes.
So then where do we find them? But you'd have to come down there and ask them.
So, hold on, there's my fear, there are issues of, it's not copyright, but ownership of their designs, and if we're creating a library, all of a sudden, we're giving to anybody who wants it. It may not be intellectual property because it is published, but there's some gray area there, and so I would just say, it's a good idea, just with some caution that we have to think through. It'd have to be voluntary, they would have to want to participate, for my comfort, right? Because I wouldn't want to be giving away, the architect I know's work to everyone. It's, unless there was general consensus among the folks working in that field that was a value and not a detriment. It's something to think about.
No, I absolutely agree. That's a good point. Mr. Salt?
So just to build on what Mr. Constance said, so there's kind of a database there on public record, but I just don't think someone that's looking for an affordable plan, maybe a first-time home builder, is going to have the knowledge to go find this database, and maybe there's another awareness campaign, like, hey, go reach out to these designers and builders that already have this library, and you can possibly save money by picking a pre-approved plan.
I might argue, if I could, that it might actually be a way to support industry with this investment. So we don't create a bevy of pre-approved plans, but we create a mechanism for those that want to participate in the process, have such designs to upload and make them available. That's an interesting way. It's like a market-driven approach as opposed to a government-driven approach.
Well, in other jurisdictions, my understanding was that they would have design contests. And everybody who submitted their design, they're automatically went through, and became part of the database. And they would have annual contests on individuals for the most, either affordable or whatever the metrics were. And they just knew they were entering. If they won the design, they got notoriety, they got promotion, but also they understood that product of their labor went into this pre-approved database. And then they did this on an annually recurring basis over a series of, in less than a decade. They had a massive database of very cutting edge, stylistic designs, because the architects and individuals, the private sector was competing for the notoriety of a magnificent design. So that's one of the ways that you could, Mr. Constant.
Thanks. So I'm very curious about this suite of pre-approved plans that already exist from all of these developers or builders, designers, engineers. Is it something that you can access, like in an organized way, or is this just something that each developer kind of has in their own suite of applications?
Yeah, through the chair, like Smell, you could probably get on their website and look at their library and pre-approved plans, I assume. I think I did this maybe 15 years ago or so, but I imagine that many of these people maintain this information on their websites. There's other questions too. I think one of the things we don't want to lose sight of is the building department does not create work. We do not do design work. We do not create. We review. If we're going to have our own suite of pre-approved plans, it's almost like, okay, this is our work now. And the municipality is responsible for this work. And if something goes wrong with this work, who's liable? And so this question should be presented to risk management as to,
So, Ross, that was a different question than the one that I asked. and the one that I asked that I'm trying to drive at, is kind of getting toward, is there a catalog of these plans that's available to us internally to have a look at and understand them?
No, not to us
Right.
internally.
Right, that's like, does that exist? Because that's the first kind of threshold question for me. If it doesn't exist, and we know, could we generate just a number? Like if we needed to spend a little time researching how many exist currently?
Through the chair, do you mean like how many permits exist?
No, how many pre-approved plans? You said that builders don't generally use any more pre-approved plans. We have a process for it. There are lots of them. Several developers have a bevy of them. Can we catalog just the number of those? Like, can we understand that?
No, we can't, because I also said that nobody does that process anymore. Nobody does their pre-approved plans anymore because the builders are hiring their own
Right, so we
plan
had
reviewers.
a bunch of pre-approved plans.
Years ago.
Right, we don't currently then because they're effectively not in use.
Correct.
Okay, so there's a little history for us to look into.
So I think what we're looking at, we're looking at this database from different perspectives, okay? So the one I see is you're not making alterations. It is a database of plans that have been previously approved, or maybe they're houses, or have been approved. They're in a database, you're not making changes. It references who the architect and who put it together is. If they want changes to that one, they can make it. But it's in a database, and that we're helping create a funnel for, that is an accumulation of all these designs from multiple architects, builders, and engineers that go in. If an individual sees a plan and they're like, yes, that one works for me, it references who's the individual that maybe owns the copyright, they want alterations, great. And what does that look like? Maybe there's an incentive for builders to put that and load that stuff on. I mean, not builders, but architects and designers in order to load that on. We're not asking you to then, if they come back and go, I want to move this bathroom and stuff like that, for you to do the work. The intention is, here's these, if they want to, it references who the designer is or what that looks like. But when you say that you can pull the plans off of Spinelli's website, or whatever, you can't. You can get a floor plan. You're not going to get, there's a big difference between a floor plan and a layout, and then a full set of plans.
Yeah, I didn't want to create the impression that you could just get plans off their website.
Yeah.
But you could see samples of houses that you would want built.
There you go. So there's this difference between a floor plan, and your full set of plans. And I guess it would be interesting just to see how we create that database to help expedite things, to help with, again, as we go in these lot sizes, we do different stuff that they can just, they have these pre-approved plans, and just looking at it again as another tool as we start adding infill, as we take a look at lot sizes and development. Another tool that we can in order to, get that cost down. Did I see a hand over here? Chris?
Thank you. Through the chair, I just had a question. So Ross, when you mentioned the historical practice of when cookie cutter subdivisions were going in, it brought you the 3 different home types they were building and a site plan that said home 1, 2, 3, home 1, 2, 3. You're not seeing that anymore. I wonder if this is this because 2 things. One, we don't have those large subdivisions going in, which I think you mentioned earlier now. And secondly, I think the market is just saying we don't want cookie cutter homes. I do think that, to Kevin's point, the affordable market absolutely would. So it does have merit to consider this idea for land developers or future homeowners to have the option to say, I get it, it's generic, but it's going to be my first home, so I'll take it. So there still is value in it. But to answer your concerns about the liability, do we have to go to risk, or can I just ask Quincy?
I think Quincy would refer you to risk.
All right, thank you. I'm just trying to figure out what the path forward is, Mr. Chair, to understand what the liabilities are.
Well, I don't think we're going to answer that in this work session here. Just one second, you've already gone, so go ahead, Scott.
I just wanted to answer that question. Builders are absolutely building the same homes over and over again in multiple subdivisions. I represent several builders, and we build the same house, we flip it around, face it the other way, but it's the same plan over and over again. It may not be in the same neighborhood, but it may be all over town.
And even, if I might, in the affordable marketplace, if you go off Turpin over by Boundary, on the south of that section there's that whole development that Holquist and some folks have put in Spinell, and they're affordable effectively, even though they're not really. It's expensive to buy anything right now. They are duplexes that are sold in half. They're all just slightly different as you go around in every area. There might be 3 builders, so they're getting maybe 6 designs in a development, but they're all kind of repeats of each other. And so it is a standard that's happening right now. The builders do have that, and maybe on their end, since they're doing independent plan review, they're able to just reiterate the process and only deal with the small issues related to change from this lot to that lot. And it feels like, I'm not saying it's not worth investigating and going down this road, but if, for example, $2,500 is the design cost for an ADU, I am betting there's really marginal savings that a designer is going to give you if you use a development design that they've already built. I bet they're not going to give you much of a discount, because that's a low barrier to entry in a lot of ways. If your building is $300,000 or $150,000, $200,000, $2,500 is pretty minimal, and a designer, it's their business. And so I think there may be only marginal savings there. And so all of this might be in the end for naught, but it's still worth investigating.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the queue before?
I just want, so you said it's 100,000 went to these pre-approved plans. What was the 100,000 to create the database?
It's just earmarked, no. So it's just earmarked for, again, investigation, exploration, and then if necessary, potential funding for expanding our website in order to do that. But we haven't carved out. We set aside for the purposes of developing and creating pre-approved plans. And it may be that we go through and we look at it, and then further investigation, a couple meetings, we're like, this is not a good, we won't spend the money. I'm a big fan of not spending money.
Me too.
If we don't have to.
Just one more point too. I mean, as neighborhoods develop over time, those buildings change too. So, I mean, I'm thinking of the neighborhood of Wiley Post, like basically right north of where I live. If you walk around, most of those buildings are actually the same house, and they just have different porches, or they have columns that were added. And same with the Windermere subdivision. It literally is the same house over and over, but over time, people customize those houses too. So we shouldn't think of a house as just that one point in time. It's always going to look like that forever. So that's another reason to think about. I mean, maybe it's a cookie cutter, but if we allow for renovation or change over time, then neighborhoods do develop that more distinct look and more unique feel.
Just to that point, the structural plans are different than the finish, right? And so the finish can be different on every house in the neighborhood, and it can still be the same house.
Yeah.
Even as it's built, not just by reconstruction or updates or upgrades. Like functionally speaking, from a Title 23 perspective, it's the same house. Whether it has colonial style or rock facing tiles or whatever.
All right, excellent. Any other comments on land database? All right, well, wrapping up, let's see if we can wrap up here and just keep this in an hour. It'd be magnificent. We'll go to audience participation. Is there anybody online? Anybody has any questions, comments, concerns? Fantastic. I don't know the procedure to hit *6 or something. Do you?
They're unmuted on my end.
They're unmuted on your end. So if we have anybody from the public who would like to comment? Hearing none. We'll just go around. If there's anybody who would like to add anything, kind of statements or closing statements, participate, or if they'd like to bring something up to make sure that we get on a future meeting, future CDC meeting. Do you have anything you'd like to share? Closing comments? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, so Habitat for Humanity has, theirs look like they are a plan they use over and over. I wonder if they would be more willing to become part of this database, because they're in the business of getting people housed quickly. I don't even have an idea if they have a pre-approved plan, but maybe talking with them would be a good idea.
Excellent. Maybe we can get a status update from them and see what they've got going. I don't know, we talked to, I can't even remember, maybe at our one of our housing workshops or something, we might invite them as a contributor. Thank you.
Through the chair, may I clarify one more point?
Please, Ross. Yes.
So, new codes come out every 3 years. Anchorage, we've been skipping the code cycles. We adopt new codes about every 6 years. A house plan is based on a specific code. Any building design is based on a specific code. So when the assembly does another code change, then that library of pre-approved plans would all have to be updated
Yeah.
to the next code cycle.
Yeah, I mentioned that we started that. I saw that as definitely because you would have to say, when was the last time it was reviewed? What is the date? Has there been a significant code change? What does that look like? So I agree, Ross. Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, just I'm looking forward to participating in these conversations, and I know there's already been a lot of discussion, so patience in advance, please, for those of us who are catching up and maybe rehashing what's been discussed 2 years ago or whatever happened. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, there's not one, I wish that there was one big decision that we could make that made things easier, but what we're finding is that the best analogy I found is like pick up sticks, and every time we try to move something, there's been so much that's been built off it, and there's all we definitely don't want to create any unintended consequences and jeopardize any kind of safety or public well-being, but I greatly appreciate it. It's been highly educational. Mr. Constance?
Yeah, thanks. First, Anna, twice you apologized in this meeting for having an opinion. You don't have to apologize for having an opinion. You are an elected member of this body. Just assert yourself. And second, I'm very intrigued in the conversation on the treating triplexes, fourplexes residential on what Dave said, that, the minimum lot size one. That the lot size is not the single issue we should focus on, that it's lot size by number of units. And if we can bake that into the project, like really think about that piece, I think we get ourselves to achieve a really profound tool for development. And I don't know how we can do that because zoning, restrictions, number of units, density, all of those factors are at play there. But if we can get an ordinance going that is lot size by number of units, some tool, I think we're gonna win.
Just my opinion, I think that's the easier way of solving this problem. I think that rather than going in and reducing or eliminating minimum lot sizes, looking at the lot sizes and the number of units that we currently have versus what we want to have and adjusting that. I think that's from a zoning perspective, just on my experience, the easier way of solving the problem.
Well, and you're not gonna like what I'm gonna say. I'm not so concerned about the easy part is that, meaning let's focus only on number of units by lot. I'm thinking a tool by which we can evaluate and adjust either at the planning level or through some process the number of units. That's a little more complex than what I think you're suggesting. And so, but what I really would love to see is a slider-based tool of some kind where a builder, developer, a private person could look at it and make decisions that might increase the number of units available to them based on the lot size. And that kind of flexibility is a nightmare to planners, I'm sure. But I would love to see it work in that way.
I would love to hear more about your ideas there. See if, obviously Title 21 is complex, it's long, it's a big document. I said this in our Friday meeting, my principal concern is to make sure that it all works. And so if you have an idea that we can implement, I'll help you get there. I just want to make sure it all works.
Yeah, of course, and I get that.
Yeah, my thought on that is the only heartburn I see with unit count is you can have a building with more units that has far less people. Another building with fewer units, but they're larger. The example would be a fourplex with all one-bedroom units versus a duplex with 2 4-bedroom units. There's distinctly more people living in that duplex. You got it and so to say there's a different design criteria, it goes back to public safety. It goes back that I'm looking at we've got 4. Now I understand Ross made a really good point. When you got 4 kitchens, you got 4 different things. But I will tell you, having small children, they're a fire hazard all the time, kitchen or not. Right? So,
but I'll jump in there and say we figured this out in the context of septic systems, and so you have to, if you're going to get a COSA updated, you have, or even a permit to build, you have to have a septic system built enough to support the rooms in the building, not the actual building. And so there is a process already that exists where we can kind of use as a model.
I think, Chris, what you're talking about is unit count. Kevin, what you're talking about is more focused on the Chapter 7 residential design standards. And I think we should probably look at both of those things, because I think that there could be benefit to some amendment there.
Well,
on
when
both
you
ends.
get into significant structures, it has to do with over 500 people, right? Then it triggers a whole different classification that we've been construction based on. And well and septics, right? So a well that services more than 24 people then has federal requirements, and it triggers a whole lot. So there's a lot that I see in code that typically just focuses on the amount of people that we're affecting here.
Right.
But when we go to building, we're talking about unit count. But unit doesn't always correlate with how many people.
Well, I think what you're talking about, though, is the trigger for the multifamily residence design standards. And what I think Chris is getting at is actually, the sliding scale for the number of units that you could necessarily build on a lot. And they're distinctly different things in Title 21, but I think you could see benefit to both potentially.
Fantastic. Well, any other comments? Otherwise, I'll look to, I really appreciate that. These are always really informative. You want to move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Thanks, Randy.